The stars had never looked so beautiful, and Daniel Wright knew he might never see them again from outside the solar system. He stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the viewing screen show a sight that made his blood run cold. 12 massive alien ships surrounded Earth, like predators circling wounded prey. Each vessel was larger than anything humanity had ever built, their hulls reflecting the light of the sun in colors that hurt to look at. Daniel had been so excited 3 months ago when they made first contact. The Galactic Coalition had seemed friendly at first. They sent messages of greeting and invited Earth's leaders to meet them at a neutral location near Mars. Humanity had celebrated. After centuries of wondering if they were alone in the universe, they finally had their answer. They were not alone, and the galaxy was full of intelligent life. But the celebration did not last long. The meeting near Mars had gone wrong in ways nobody expected. The Coalition representatives, strange beings that looked like giant insects and living crystals, had studied humanity's history. They looked at the wars, the violence, the conflicts that marked human civilization. They watched recordings of World War II, the nuclear bombings, the genocides, and the endless smaller wars that followed. The aliens made their judgment quickly and without mercy. Humanity was too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable. The insectoid creatures, called the Vexari, spoke through translators, in clicking sounds that became cold words. The crystalline beings, called lumens, glowed with harsh light as they delivered their verdict. Humanity would not be allowed to join the galaxy. Humanity would not be allowed to spread beyond their home system. Humanity would be locked away like a dangerous animal in a cage. Lisa Harper remembered that day clearly. She commanded the Mars Colony Research Station when the Coalition fleet arrived. She had tried to argue with them, tried to explain that humanity had changed, that they were better now, that they deserved a chance. The aliens listened politely and then ignored everything she said. They had made up their minds before they even arrived. The ultimatum was simple. All human colonies beyond the solar system had to be abandoned within 72 hours. Every person, every piece of equipment, every structure had to be evacuated. Humanity had established 14 colonies on planets circling other stars. Each colony represented years of work, billions of dollars, and the hopes of thousands of people who wanted to build new worlds. All of it had to be given up. Lisa watched as families packed whatever they could carry. Children cried because they did not understand why they had to leave their homes. Adults tried to stay strong, but she could see the fear and anger in their eyes. The Coalition did not help with the evacuation. They simply watched and waited. Their weapons pointed at the colonies like loaded guns. The message was clear. Leave now or die. The transport ships were not big enough for everyone. People had to leave behind pets, personal belongings, anything that was not essential for survival. Lisa helped load the last ship from Mars Colony, making sure every human was accounted for. She was the last one to board, taking one final look at the base that had been her home for 5 years. She wondered if humans would ever return. Jake Morrison was young and stupid and brave. He was a pilot in the Solar Defense Force, which was really just a fancy name for the small military humanity had built to protect their space stations and colonies. Jake did not want to accept defeat. He believed that if someone could just get through the alien blockade and reach other civilizations, they could find allies, find help, find someone who would listen to humanity's side of the story. He took a stealth fighter, one of the newest models designed to avoid radar and sensors. Jake told no one about his plan, because he knew they would stop him. He launched from a hidden bay on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, and set course for the edge of the solar system. His plan was to slip past the alien sentinel stations at maximum speed. Hoping his small ship would not be detected, Jake made it halfway to the barrier before they found him. The alien weapons did not give him time to surrender or turn back. One moment, his instruments showed everything normal. The next moment, his ship exploded in a ball of fire and radiation. The explosion was visible from Earth through telescopes. The Coalition broadcast the destruction on all frequencies, making sure every human saw what happened to those who tried to escape. Daniel Wright watched Jake's ship die on his screens. He had known the young pilot, had trained with him during academy days. The waste of it all made him sick. But it also taught him something important. The barrier was not something they could sneak past or fly around. It was absolute. Any ship that tried to leave was detected and destroyed instantly. The Coalition finished building the barrier 3 weeks after Jake's death. It was not a physical wall, but an energy field that wrapped around the entire solar system like an invisible bubble. Special stations floated at regular intervals along the barrier, maintaining the field and watching for any escape attempts. The barrier did more than just block ships. It also blocked communications from reaching beyond the solar system. Humanity was completely isolated. Lisa Harper took charge of organizing the returned colonists. Millions of people suddenly needed homes, jobs, and reasons to keep living. Earth was already crowded before the evacuation. Now it was packed beyond capacity. Food shortages began within months. Power grids struggled to keep up with demand. Violence broke out in some cities as people fought over resources. The space colonies within the solar system were not much better. Mars Colony, the largest settlement beyond Earth, had been designed for 50,000 people. Now it housed 200,000. The life support systems ran constantly at maximum capacity. One failure, one breakdown, and thousands would die from lack of oxygen or water. Daniel Wright was promoted to admiral during this crisis. The Solar Defense Force needed leaders who could keep people organized and hopeful when everything seemed hopeless. He moved his headquarters to a military station orbiting Earth, from where he could coordinate defense and relief efforts throughout the solar system. But defense against what? The Coalition made it clear they would not invade. They did not need to. Humanity would either survive within their cage or slowly destroy themselves, fighting over limited resources. The aliens were content to wait and watch. They had done this before to other species. Daniel learned from intercepted communications. Some trapped species survived. Others did not. The Coalition did not care which outcome happened to humanity. The hatred grew slowly but steadily. At first, people were too shocked and scared to feel much of anything besides grief. But as the months turned into years, anger replaced fear. Humanity had been judged unfairly. They had been punished for crimes committed by ancestors, for wars fought before most living humans were even born. They had been locked away without trial, without appeal, without mercy. Lisa Harper felt that anger burning in her chest every day. She channeled it into work, organizing the colonies, making sure people had food and water and shelter. But at night, alone in her quarters, she let herself imagine revenge. She thought about human ships burning Coalition worlds, about their cities falling, about making them feel the helplessness and rage that humanity felt now. Daniel Wright felt the same anger, but he hid it better. As a military commander, he had to project calm and control. His officers and soldiers looked to him for guidance. If he showed despair, they would despair. If he showed rage, they might do something stupid that would get people killed. So Daniel buried his emotions deep and focused on keeping humanity alive. The barrier hummed with power. Scientists studied it constantly, trying to understand how it worked, looking for weaknesses. They found none. The technology was far beyond anything humanity could create. The energy requirements alone were staggering. Maintaining a field around an entire solar system should have been impossible. But the Coalition did it easily. 5 years passed. Then 10. Children who had been babies during the exile were now old enough to attend school. They learned about Earth history, but also about the day the aliens came and took away humanity's future. They learned that the galaxy was full of species who saw humans as violent animals that needed to be caged. They learned to hate the Coalition as naturally as they learned to read and write. Daniel Wright was older now, his hair going gray, his face marked with lines of stress and worry. He still commanded the Solar Defense Force, but wondered what they were defending against. The real enemy was outside the barrier, untouchable. His ships patrolled the inner system, stopping pirates and smugglers, keeping order among the colonies. It felt pointless sometimes. Lisa Harper had become one of the leaders of the civilian government. She worked with the Solar Council, a group of representatives from all the major colonies and Earth. They made laws, settled disputes, and tried to keep human civilization from collapsing. It was exhausting work that never ended. But both Daniel and Lisa held on to one belief. They would not give up. Humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. They had survived nuclear weapons and climate change and 100 other disasters. They would survive this too. Somehow, someday, they would find a way to break free. They would show the coalition that humanity was not some violent species that needed to be locked away. They would prove their worth or die trying. The stars still looked beautiful through the view screens. Daniel stared at them often, remembering when humans could travel to them freely. He made himself a promise. He would live to see the day when humans could travel to the stars again. He did not know how it would happen. He did not know how long it would take. But he believed it would happen because the alternative was unthinkable. Humanity had been cast out from the galaxy. They had been judged and found wanting. They had been imprisoned in their own home system like criminals. But they were still alive. They were still fighting. And as long as humans drew breath, they would never stop trying to reach the stars again. 20 years had passed since the barrier went up, and Helen Carter could still remember the day she decided to stop feeling sorry for humanity and start doing something about their situation. She was a physicist, one of the best in the solar system, and she had spent the first 5 years after the exile studying the barrier itself. She learned everything she could about the energy signatures, the power distribution, the way it detected ships and destroyed them. Knowledge was power, and Helen intended to gather as much knowledge as possible. The barrier was sophisticated in ways that amazed and frustrated her. It did not just block ships from leaving, it also prevented any kind of probe or drone from crossing. Even messages could not get through. Radio signals bounced back. Laser communications were absorbed. The coalition had created a perfect prison, and they had done it with technology that humanity barely understood. But understanding would come with time. Helen believed that absolutely. Every technology could be learned. Every system could be analyzed. Every secret could be uncovered. If you were patient and smart enough. The coalition had made one mistake. They had locked humanity in a cage, but left them with all their tools and all their intelligence. Given enough time, humans would figure out how to break free. Kyle Bennett had a different job but the same goal. He was an engineer and a commander, responsible for building new habitats in the outer solar system. The simple truth was that Earth could not support all of humanity anymore. There were too many people and not enough resources. The only solution was to spread out, to build colonies on every moon and planet and asteroid that could support human life. Kyle oversaw the construction of massive orbital stations around Jupiter. The gas giant had dozens of moons, each with valuable resources. Europa had water ice. Io had sulfur and metals. Ganymede had more water and rocky material. Kyle's teams mined these moons, processing the raw materials into building supplies, fuel, and everything else humanity needed to survive. The work was dangerous. Space had always been dangerous. But now there was no margin for error. Before the exile, if a colony ran into serious trouble, they could call for help from Earth or from nearby star systems. Now they were on their own. If a habitat failed, everyone inside would die. There was no rescue coming from outside the solar system. Kyle lost people. Accidents happened despite all precautions. A mining crew suffocated when their tunnel collapsed on Europa. A transport ship exploded during refueling near Io, killing 18. A solar flare caught a construction team outside their shielding, cooking them with radiation. Each death hurt, but Kyle could not let grief stop the work. Too many people depended on the habitats he was building. Ethan Brooks was younger than Helen or Kyle, part of the generation that grew up knowing only the barrier. He had been 12 when the coalition locked humanity away. Now he was 32. A brilliant engineer who specialized in propulsion systems. Ethan had a theory that he could not share with most people, because it sounded crazy. He believed that the barrier only detected and destroyed ships trying to leave the solar system. Ships flying around inside the system were ignored. This seemed obvious. But Ethan thought he could use it. If he could build engines that worked differently from traditional drives, engines that did not produce the kind of signatures the barrier looked for, maybe they could be used later for something important. He did not know what yet. But he had faith that the opportunity would come. Ethan spent years in his workshop on Mercury, where solar power was abundant and nobody bothered him. He experimented with new fusion drives, with plasma propulsion, with electromagnetic acceleration. Some designs failed spectacularly. Others showed promise. Ethan kept detailed notes on everything, building a library of propulsion knowledge that might prove useful someday. Claire Davis tested Ethan's engines. She was a pilot, one of the best in the Solar Defense Force. Claire had nerves of steel and reflexes that bordered on superhuman. She also had a talent for knowing exactly how far she could push a ship before something broke. Ethan needed that talent because his experimental engines often operated at the edge of failure. Claire took the new drives on long flights through the inner solar system, pushing them to maximum speed, testing their limits. She flew from Mercury to Mars and back in record time. She raced through the asteroid belt, dodging rocks while running the engines at 110% capacity. She provided Ethan with data that helped him improve each new design. The flights were thrilling but also frustrating. Claire was built to fly fast and far. Being trapped in one solar system felt like being a bird with clipped wings. She dreamed of the day when she could point her ship at a distant star and just go, leaving the barrier and the coalition far behind. But that day seemed impossibly distant. Marcus Stone did not believe that day would ever come through peaceful means. He was a general in the Solar Defense Force, and he believed that, eventually, humanity would have to fight their way out. The coalition had imprisoned them through superior force. Only superior force would set them free. Marcus trained his soldiers relentlessly. They practiced combat maneuvers in zero gravity. They ran simulations of ship-to-ship battles. They studied every scrap of information about coalition vessels and weapons. Marcus knew that his forces were hopelessly outmatched by current coalition technology. But he also knew that wars were not won by technology alone. Strategy, tactics, courage, and determination mattered too. Some people thought Marcus was crazy. They called him paranoid, said he was preparing for a war that would never happen. Marcus did not care what they thought. He had been a colonel when the coalition arrived, had watched helplessly as they locked humanity away. That helplessness had burned itself into his soul. He would never be helpless again. The Solar Defense Force grew under Marcus's leadership. Volunteers came from every colony and station. Some joined because they wanted to fight. Others joined because the military provided steady pay and food when civilian jobs were scarce. Marcus took them all and turned them into soldiers. He created a military force that was disciplined, skilled, and ready for anything. But ready for what? That question haunted Marcus in quiet moments. His forces trained constantly, but had no real enemy to fight. Pirates and smugglers were not enough to keep his troops sharp. They needed a real challenge, a real threat. Part of him almost wished the coalition would attack, just so his people could prove themselves. Amanda Foster thought Marcus was too focused on military solutions. She led a civilian resistance movement that believed humanity should never stop trying to break free peacefully. Amanda organized protests and demonstrations. She gave speeches about freedom and dignity. She kept the dream of liberation alive in people's hearts. Amanda's followers came from all walks of life. Scientists who wanted to explore the galaxy, artists who wanted to see alien worlds, parents who wanted their children to grow up free. They gathered in parks and public spaces, holding signs and chanting slogans. The demonstrations were always peaceful. Amanda insisted on that. Violence would only prove the coalition right about humanity. The government tolerated Amanda's movement because they understood its value. Hope was a resource as important as food or water. Without hope, people gave up. They stopped trying. They accepted their cage. Amanda kept hope alive, and that made her one of the most important people in the solar system, even if she held no official position. Years continued to pass. The children born after the exile grew up and had children of their own. A whole generation now existed that had never known freedom, that had never seen Earth from another star system. They learned about the galaxy from books and recordings, but it all seemed as distant and unreal as fairy tales. Helen Carter's hair was gray now. She was 68 years old and still studying the barrier. Her obsession had not faded with time. If anything, it had grown stronger. She had teams of scientists working under her direction, thousands of people all focused on understanding the prison that held humanity captive. They made small discoveries over the years. They learned that the barrier drew power from quantum fluctuations in space itself. They learned that the sentinel stations communicated with each other through faster-than-light signals. They learned that the coalition checked on the barrier only once every few months, as if they had forgotten about humanity entirely. But small discoveries were not enough. Helen needed a breakthrough. Something that would let humanity overcome the massive technology gap between them and the coalition. She did not know what form that breakthrough would take. She just knew they needed it desperately. Kyle Bennett's colonies were thriving now. The orbital stations around Jupiter housed millions of people. Similar stations existed around Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Humanity had spread through the entire solar system, turning it into a vast network of interconnected habitats. The population was still growing, still pushing the limits of available resources. But at least, nobody was starving anymore. The colonies were not just surviving, they were building, creating, improving. New technologies emerged from the harsh necessities of space life. Better recycling systems that wasted nothing. More efficient power generation from solar and fusion sources. Advanced hydroponics that produced more food from less space. Humanity was adapting to their cage, making it into a home, but adaptation was not acceptance. Kyle worked closely with Marcus Stone, making sure the military had everything they needed. Shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt built new vessels for the Solar Defense Force. Weapon systems were tested in secret locations far from prying eyes. Humanity was preparing for something, even if nobody knew exactly what. Ethan Brooks had perfected his new propulsion systems. His drives were faster, more efficient, and more powerful than anything humanity had built before the exile. Ships equipped with his engines could cross the solar system in days rather than weeks. Claire Davis set new speed records regularly, her ships blazing through space like comets. The improved speed changed everything. Communication between colonies became easier. Trade flourished. The military could respond to emergencies faster. Humanity was becoming more unified, more organized, more capable. The cage was still there, but humans were learning to move freely within it. Marcus Stone's forces continued to grow. The Solar Defense Force now numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They had ships, weapons, training, and most importantly, motivation. Every soldier knew why they served. They served so that humanity could be free. They served so that their children would not grow up in a cage. They served because someone had to be ready when the opportunity came. Amanda Foster kept speaking, kept organizing, kept reminding people what they were fighting for. Her movement had spread to every colony. Millions of people attended her rallies, listened to her speeches, found strength in her words. She did not know how freedom would come, but she believed it would. Faith was powerful, and Amanda had faith in humanity. Helen Carter lay awake at night sometimes, staring at the ceiling of her quarters on Mercury, thinking about the barrier. 35 years she had studied it. 35 years of analysis and testing and learning. The breakthrough had to be close. It had to be. Because humanity could not stay caged forever. The barrier still hummed with power. The Sentinel stations still watched. The Coalition still believed that humanity was safely locked away. No longer a threat. No longer worth worrying about. They were wrong. But they did not know it yet. Inside the cage, humanity was growing stronger every day. Learning, building, preparing, waiting for their chance to show the galaxy what they could do. Greg Palmer had been mining asteroids in the Kuiper Belt for 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything this frozen region of space had to offer. Ice, rock, metal, and more ice. The work was boring but paid well, and Greg liked the solitude. Out here, billions of kilometers from the sun, a man could think without interruption. He operated his mining rig alone, drilling into asteroids, processing the materials, and sending the valuable stuff back to the inner colonies. The anomaly appeared on his sensors during a routine scan. Greg was searching for iron-rich asteroids when his instruments detected something unusual. There was a mass signature that did not match any natural formation. It was too regular, too symmetrical. Greg changed course to investigate, curious about what he had found. As his mining rig approached, Greg saw something that made his heart race. It was a ship. An alien ship. But not one that belonged to the Coalition. This vessel was ancient beyond imagining, its hull covered in ice that had accumulated over millions of years. The design was unlike anything humans or the Coalition had ever built. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface. The metal itself seemed to shimmer with colors that should not exist. Greg immediately sent a message back to the inner system, though the transmission would take hours to arrive. He described what he had found, his voice shaking with excitement. Then he maneuvered his rig closer, using external cameras to capture every detail of the alien wreck. The ship was huge, at least 3 kilometers long, shaped like a crescent moon with extensions that looked like crystallized branches. Helen Carter received Greg's message while working late in her laboratory on Mercury. She was 73 years old now, and her assistants kept telling her to retire. But retirement was for people who had nothing left to do, and Helen had everything to do. When she heard Greg's description of the ancient ship, she knew immediately that this was important. This could be the breakthrough she had been searching for. Within 12 hours, Helen had assembled a research team and boarded a fast transport bound for the Kuiper Belt. The journey would take 8 days, even with Ethan Brooks's new engines. Helen spent the time reading every report Greg sent, studying the images, analyzing the sensor data. This ship was old. Older than human civilization. Older than the Coalition. It belonged to a species that had vanished long before humans climbed down from trees. Maya Rodriguez was on Helen's research team. She was a xenoarchaeologist, one of the few in the solar system since there had been no alien artifacts to study. For the past 35 years, Maya specialized in dead civilizations, in piecing together the past from fragments and ruins. She had never expected to practice her profession on an actual alien ship. Chris Walsh was the other key member of the team. He was a computer scientist and cryptographer, skilled at breaking codes and understanding alien data systems. Chris had spent years studying the Coalition's technology through intercepted transmissions and captured probes. He knew how aliens thought differently than humans, how their logic and mathematics followed different patterns. When the research team arrived at Greg's location, they transferred to a smaller shuttle that could dock with the ancient vessel. Greg had already cut an entrance through the ice-covered hull, carefully so as not to damage anything inside. Helen was the first through the opening, her suit lights illuminating a corridor that had been dark for countless ages. The interior of the ship was surprisingly well preserved. The vacuum of space and the extreme cold had protected it from decay. Frost covered every surface, glittering in the lights like diamonds. The corridor stretched ahead, its walls covered with those same strange geometric patterns they had seen on the hull. Maya took samples while Chris scanned for any active systems. They found the first body 3 hours into their exploration. It was not human, and not like any coalition species. The alien had been tall, perhaps 3 meters, with 4 arms and a head that looked almost triangular. Its body had frozen solid, preserved perfectly by the cold. Maya examined it carefully, taking measurements and images. This was a member of the species that built the ship, the mysterious race that had died out millions of years ago. Helen led the team deeper into the ship, searching for the bridge or a computer core, anywhere that might contain information. They passed through chambers filled with equipment they could not identify. Storage rooms held containers of materials that had survived the ages. Everything was alien, strange, wonderful. But Helen needed more than artifacts. She needed knowledge. Chris found the data archive in what appeared to be the ship's command center. It was a crystalline structure 2 meters tall, pulsing with faint light. Somehow, incredibly, it still had power. Chris approached carefully, his instruments detecting energy signatures and data transmissions. The archive was active, waiting for someone to access it after millions of years of silence. Connecting to the archive was risky. They had no idea what kind of security systems might be in place, what viruses or traps might be waiting for intruders. But Chris was careful and skilled. He created isolated systems, multiple firewalls, protective layers between his equipment and the archive. Then, he made contact. The data that flooded in was overwhelming. Exabytes of information, blueprints, records, histories, scientific data. Chris's systems struggled to process it all. The archive contained the accumulated knowledge of an entire civilization, the species that had built this ship. They called themselves the Architects. And they had been the dominant power in the galaxy long before the Coalition ever existed. Helen watched as the first images appeared on her screen. Star maps showing thousands of worlds the Architects had visited. Technical diagrams of technologies that made Coalition science look primitive. Records of experiments, discoveries, wars, and finally, extinction. The Architects had been wiped out by something they called the decay, a phenomenon that destroyed their ability to reproduce. Within 2 generations, their entire species had died out. But before they vanished, the Architects had sent out ships like this one, filled with their knowledge, hoping that someday other species would find them and learn from their achievements. This ship had drifted through space for millions of years, waiting for someone to discover it. Now, humanity had found it. And the timing could not have been better. Maya explored the rest of the ship while Chris worked on downloading and organizing the archive data. She found living quarters, laboratories, engine rooms, and weapon bays. Everything was technology far beyond what humanity or the Coalition possessed. The engines alone were marvels, capable of moving the massive ship faster than light without needing jump gates or wormholes. The weapons could destroy planets. The shields could withstand almost anything. Helen brought in more researchers over the following weeks. Scientists, engineers, and specialists of every kind came to study the Architect ship. They set up a research station nearby, a temporary habitat where they could work without making the long journey back to the inner system. Greg Palmer stayed too, his mining rig forgotten, fascinated by what he had discovered. The more they learned, the more excited Helen became. The Architects had faced many of the same problems humanity now faced. They had been imprisoned by other species at various points in their history. They had fought wars against superior forces. They had survived and thrived by being smarter than their enemies, by developing technology that gave them advantages. The archive contained detailed blueprints for Architect technology, power systems that drew energy from quantum fluctuations. The same principle the Coalition used for the barrier, but implemented with far greater efficiency. Propulsion systems that bent space itself, allowing faster-than-light travel without the limitations of jump gates. Weapons that manipulated gravitational fields to tear ships apart. shields that existed in multiple dimensions, making them almost impenetrable. Chris worked day and night, translating the architect data into forms humans could understand. The mathematics was incredibly complex, operating on principles that human science had barely begun to explore. But it was not impossible. With time and effort, humans could learn this technology. They could build it. They could use it. Nathan Cole was 22 years old when Helen recruited him to the Architect Project. He was a mathematical genius who had published groundbreaking papers on quantum mechanics and spatial geometry. Nathan saw patterns that others missed, understood connections that seemed impossible. Helen knew that someone with his talents was exactly what the project needed. Nathan dove into the architect mathematics with enthusiasm. While other researchers struggled with the alien concepts, Nathan grasped them almost instinctively. He began creating translation guides, converting architect formulas into human mathematics, building bridges between two very different ways of understanding the universe. His work accelerated the entire project, turning what might have taken decades into something achievable within years. The research station in the Kuiper Belt became the most important location in the solar system. More people arrived constantly, bringing equipment and supplies. They built larger habitats, better laboratories, more powerful computers. The architect ship was carefully studied, every system examined and documented. Some components were removed and sent to laboratories on Mercury and Mars for detailed analysis. Helen knew they had to keep the discovery secret from the Coalition. If the aliens learned that humans had found architect technology, they might destroy the solar system to prevent humanity from becoming a threat. The barrier blocked communications from leaving, but Helen took no chances. All transmissions about the project were heavily encrypted. Only a select few knew the full scope of what they had discovered. Daniel Wright was one of those few. As the leader of the Solar Defense Force, he needed to know about anything that might affect humanity's security. When Helen showed him the architect blueprints, Daniel understood immediately what they meant. This was the weapon humanity needed. Not just weapons in the literal sense, but the tools to break free from the barrier and challenge the Coalition. Daniel began working with Helen to create a long-term plan. The technology was incredibly advanced, far beyond anything humans had built before. It would take years to understand it fully, more years to develop manufacturing processes, even more time to actually build ships and weapons using architect designs. They would need to be patient, careful, and above all, secret. Marcus Stone was also brought into the secret. When Daniel showed him what the architects had built, Marcus smiled for the first time in years. This was what he had been waiting for, what he had been preparing his forces for. With architect technology, the Solar Defense Force could stand against the Coalition. They could fight and win. Marcus immediately began planning how to integrate the new technology into military operations. Kyle Bennett's shipyards would be crucial for building the new vessels. He was shown the architect designs and asked how long it would take to construct them. Kyle studied the blueprints carefully, consulted with his engineers, and gave Daniel his estimate. 10 years, maybe 15, to build a fleet large enough to challenge the Coalition. It seemed like a long time, but they had already waited 35 years. What was another decade or two? Ethan Brooks was ecstatic when he saw the architect propulsion systems. They were everything he had dreamed of, and more. Engines that could cross light years in days, that could accelerate to incredible speeds without requiring enormous amounts of fuel. Ethan volunteered to lead the team that would adapt these designs for human use. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Amanda Foster learned about the discovery later than the others. Helen hesitated to tell her because Amanda was so public, so visible. But Daniel convinced Helen that Amanda needed to know. The resistance leader had kept hope alive for decades. She deserved to know that hope was about to become reality. When Amanda heard about the architect ship, she cried. They were tears of joy and relief. All the speeches, all the demonstrations, all the years of keeping faith when others lost theirs. It had all been worth it. Humanity would be free. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next year. But soon. Within her lifetime, she would see humans travel to the stars again. The research continued in secret, while the rest of humanity went about their lives unaware. Helen coordinated hundreds of scientists, all working on different aspects of architect technology. Chris organized the massive database, creating indexes and search tools so researchers could find what they needed. Nathan solved mathematical problems that had stumped everyone else, clearing obstacles that blocked progress. In the frozen darkness of the Kuiper Belt, the ancient ship gave up its secrets. The architects had been gone for millions of years, their civilization reduced to dust and memory, but their knowledge survived, waiting for a species that needed it desperately. Humanity had been judged unworthy by the Coalition, locked away and forgotten. But now, they had found a gift from the past, a treasure that would let them reach for the future. The architects could not save themselves, but perhaps their legacy would save humanity. Ryan Tucker had never known freedom. He was born 3 years after the Coalition erected the barrier, grew up in a habitat orbiting Jupiter, and joined the Solar Defense Force as soon as he turned 18. Now, at 32, he commanded a destroyer called the Rising Phoenix. His crew was like him, young men and women who had spent their entire lives preparing for a war they had never seen. Ryan's generation was different from their parents. They did not remember the humiliation of exile or the shock of first contact. For them, the Coalition was simply the enemy, as natural as gravity or vacuum. They had trained their whole lives knowing that someday they would fight. They did not question whether that day would come. They only wondered, when? The breakthrough came in the 50th year after the exile. Stephanie Morgan, one of the lead engineers on the Architect project, successfully built the first working shield generator based on Architect technology. The test took place on a remote asteroid in the Kuiper Belt, far from any inhabited stations. Stephanie and her team set up the generator, activated it, and watched as a shimmer of energy surrounded the asteroid. Then they fired weapons at it, first small missiles, then larger ones, then energy weapons equivalent to what the Coalition used. The shield held against everything. The energy absorbed the impacts, dispersing the force across its entire surface. Even sustained bombardment could not break through. Stephanie ran the numbers and confirmed what everyone hoped. This shield could withstand direct hits from Coalition weapons and possibly even resist the barrier's destructive power. Helen Carter watched the test from Mercury, her heart pounding with excitement. She was 90 years old now, her body kept alive by advanced medical treatments, her mind still sharp despite her age. She had spent half a century working toward this moment. The shield was not just a defensive technology, it was proof that humans could master architect science, that they could build things the Coalition could not match. The shield breakthrough accelerated other projects. Engineers who had been stuck on problems for years suddenly found solutions. Nathan Cole, now a middle-aged man and the leading expert on architect mathematics, published paper after paper explaining the principles behind their technology. Factories throughout the solar system retooled to manufacture components for architect-based systems. Ethan Brooks completed work on the new propulsion system 3 months after the shield test. His engines used the same space-bending principles the architects had pioneered, allowing ships to move faster than anything humanity or the Coalition had ever built. The engines were small enough to fit in vessels the size of frigates but powerful enough to accelerate those ships to incredible speeds. Claire Davis tested the new engine on an experimental craft built specifically for that purpose. When she activated it, the ship leaped forward like a startled horse. The acceleration was smooth and constant, pushing Claire back in her seat. She flew from the inner solar system to Neptune in less than a day, a journey that used to take weeks. The new drive worked perfectly, and it was just the beginning. Weapons development proceeded more slowly, but steadily. The architect archives contained designs for weapons that manipulated gravity, that tore space itself, that could destroy entire planets if used at full power. Human scientists worked carefully to understand these systems, scaling them down to sizes that could be mounted on warships. The weapons were terrifying in their efficiency, capable of ripping through coalition shields like they were made of paper. Daniel Wright, now in his 80s but still commanding the Solar Defense Force, gathered the Solar Council for a critical meeting. The location was a secure station deep in the asteroid belt, far from any place the Coalition might be watching. Representatives from every major colony attended, along with military commanders, scientists, and civilian leaders. Amanda Foster was there too, representing the people who had kept faith through 5 decades of imprisonment. Daniel stood before the council and laid out the situation. Humanity now possessed technology superior to the Coalition in several key areas. Their shields were stronger. Their engines were faster. Their weapons were more powerful. Production was ramping up in hidden shipyards scattered throughout the outer system. Within a year, they would have a fleet capable of challenging the Coalition. The question before the council was simple but profound. What should they do with this power? Some argued for a cautious approach, breaking through the barrier and simply fleeing to unexplored regions of space. Others wanted to negotiate, using their newfound strength to force the Coalition to treat them as equals. But Marcus Stone argued for something bolder. Marcus stood before the council, his white hair and scarred face showing his age, his voice still strong and clear. He proposed a direct assault on the Coalition, not a war of conquest, but a war of liberation. Intelligence gathered over 50 years showed that many species in the Coalition were not there by choice. They were vassals, conquered and subjugated by the Vexari and Lumens. If humanity struck at the Coalition's heart, they might trigger rebellions throughout the galaxy. The debate lasted 3 days. Arguments flew back and forth, passionate and logical, fearful and bold. Some warned that attacking the Coalition would lead to humanity's extinction. Others pointed out that staying caged forever was its own kind of death. In the end, the council voted. Humanity would not run. They would not hide. They would strike back at those who had imprisoned them. Preparation intensified after the vote. Julie Barnes, one of the finest commanders in the Solar Defense Force, was given command of the new flagship, Liberty's Dawn. The ship was a monster, 3 kilometers long, armed with architect weapons and protected by shields that could withstand sustained bombardment. It was built in sections at different locations, then assembled in orbit around Neptune, where the Coalition was unlikely to notice. Julie was 50 years old, a career officer who had spent 3 decades training for this moment. She walked through her new ship, inspecting every system, meeting every crew member. The Liberty's Dawn was not just a warship. It was a symbol of everything humanity had accomplished during their exile. It represented their refusal to accept defeat, their determination to be free. The fleet grew around the Liberty's Dawn. Destroyers like Ryan Tucker's Rising Phoenix, cruisers equipped with the latest weapons, carriers launching fighters with engines that made them faster than anything the Coalition had. The ships were not built to flee. They were built to fight and win. By the time the 60th anniversary of the exile approached, humanity had assembled a force of over 200 warships. Training exercises took place in the outer system, far from the barrier where the Coalition might detect them. Ryan Tucker flew his destroyer through simulated battles, coordinating with other ships, practicing tactics that Marcus Stone had developed. The crews were sharp, skilled, and motivated. They knew what was coming and they were ready for it. Intelligence was crucial to the plan. Over 50 years, humanity had captured and studied several Coalition probes that passed near the barrier. They had intercepted countless transmissions. They had built detailed maps of Coalition space, identifying key military installations, fleet positions, and the homeworlds of the Vexari and Lumens. They knew their enemy as well as anyone could without actually fighting them. The date was set for the 60th anniversary of the exile. The symbolism was deliberate. For 60 years, humanity had been prisoners. On the day that marked 6 decades of captivity, they would break their chains. Every ship in the fleet received their orders. Every crew member understood their role. The plan was audacious and dangerous, but if it worked, it would change the galaxy forever. Helen Carter would not live to see the attack. She died peacefully in her sleep 2 months before the anniversary. Her work complete. Her funeral was attended by thousands, including everyone who mattered in the solar system. Daniel Wright gave the eulogy, speaking about a woman who had never stopped believing that humanity could overcome any obstacle. Helen had spent her final decades making that belief a reality. The night before the attack, Daniel could not sleep. He stood in the observation deck of a military station, looking out at the stars. So much had changed since the coalition arrived 60 years ago. Humanity had been weak then, divided, unprepared. Now they were united, strong, and ready to take their place in the galaxy. Daniel thought about all the people who had died waiting for this moment. He thought about Jake Morrison, who had tried to break through the barrier in those early days. Tomorrow, humanity would finish what Jake had started. Ryan Tucker gathered his crew the morning of the attack. They assembled in the Rising Phoenix's main bay, over 200 men and women. Ryan looked at their faces, seeing determination mixed with fear. Fear was good. It kept you sharp, kept you careful, but determination would win the day. He gave them a simple speech. They were not fighting for conquest or revenge. They were fighting for the right to exist as free people, to travel the stars without permission, to build their future without chains. Every person on this ship had been born in a cage. Today, they would break out. Today, humanity would show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. Julie Barnes sat in the command chair of the Liberty's Dawn, watching her screens show the fleet moving into position. 200 ships, spread across the solar system, all preparing to strike simultaneously. The coordination required was incredible, but they had practiced this moment for years. Every captain knew their target. Every crew was ready. Marcus Stone was aboard the Liberty's Dawn, serving as the tactical coordinator for the entire operation. He had spent his entire career preparing for this battle. Now, in his final years, he would see whether all that preparation had been worth it. He reviewed the plan one last time, checking every detail. The margin for error was small, but it was enough. Amanda Foster watched from a civilian station orbiting Mars. She could not fight, but she had insisted on being present for this moment. Around her, millions of people watched on their screens, holding their breath. This was it. The moment that would define humanity's future. They would either break free or die trying. There was no middle ground. The clock counted down. Ships across the solar system powered up their architect engines. Shields activated, glowing with energy. Weapons armed and targeted. At 100 locations around the barrier, human vessels prepared to strike simultaneously. The Coalition's Sentinel stations had grown complacent over 60 years. They were about to learn that complacency was deadly. 0 hour arrived. Julie Barnes gave the order. Every ship in the fleet fired at once, targeting the Sentinel stations and the barrier itself. Missiles streaked through space. Energy weapons discharged. The architect technology performed exactly as designed. The Sentinel stations, built to destroy any ship trying to escape, were overwhelmed and destroyed in seconds. The barrier flickered. The sustained bombardment from 200 ships, all equipped with weapons the Coalition had never encountered, began tearing holes in the energy field. The barrier tried to adapt, tried to compensate, but it had been designed to handle 1 or 2 ships at most. It could not withstand this coordinated assault. Ryan Tucker watched his screens as the barrier around his section collapsed. Empty space lay ahead, no longer blocked by the deadly field. For the first time in his life, there was nothing preventing him from flying to the stars. He felt tears on his cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. Freedom. After 60 years, humanity was free. The Coalition's response was exactly what Marcus Stone had predicted. Within 6 hours of the barrier's destruction, a massive fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. Over 300 warships, led by Vex-Ari and Lumen commanders who had crushed dozens of rebellions over the centuries. They approached with arrogant confidence, broadcasting demands for humanity's immediate surrender. Ryan Tucker's battle group intercepted them near Neptune. The Rising, Phoenix, and 15 other destroyers faced a coalition force 5 times their size. Ryan's hands were steady on the controls as he gave the order to engage. The coalition commanders expected the humans to retreat or be quickly destroyed. Instead, they encountered something they had never seen before. The battle was brief and brutal. Human ships equipped with architect shields absorbed coalition weapons' fire without damage. Human engines allowed them to outmaneuver the enemy vessels with ease. Human weapons tore through coalition shields like they were made of paper. Ryan watched his tactical display as enemy ships exploded one after another. The coalition force had superior numbers but inferior technology. The outcome was never in doubt. Within 20 minutes, the coalition fleet was destroyed. Over 300 ships reduced to debris and radiation. Not a single human vessel was lost. Ryan looked at his crew, seeing shock and joy on their faces. They had won. They had actually won. The coalition was not invincible after all. The victory near Neptune sent shockwaves through coalition space. For centuries, the Vex-Ari and Lumens had dominated the galaxy through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. No one had ever defeated them so completely. The news spread quickly through coalition networks. Humanity, the species that had been dismissed as too violent and primitive, had just destroyed a major fleet without taking casualties. Julie Barnes did not wait for the coalition to recover. She led the Liberty's Dawn and the main battle fleet directly toward coalition space, following the route that intelligence had identified as leading to Vex-Ari territory. The journey took 3 weeks even with architect engines. Every day of travel, the fleet grew more confident. They had faced the enemy and won. They could do it again. The first coalition world they reached was called Vex Prime, a planet where the insectoid Vex-Ari had enslaved a species of peaceful mammalian aliens. The Vex-Ari had strip-mined the planet's resources, worked the native population to death in factories, and turned a beautiful world into an industrial wasteland. Julie looked at images of the planet and felt cold anger. This was what the coalition called civilization. The Vex-Ari fleet defending the planet was larger than the one that had attacked the solar system. Over 500 ships surrounded Vex Prime, confident that numbers would overwhelm the human invaders. Marcus Stone studied their formations and smiled. They were using tactics that were probably centuries old, designed to fight enemies with similar technology. They had no idea how to fight an enemy that was technologically superior. The battle for Vex Prime lasted 6 hours. Human ships darted through the enemy fleet, like sharks among fish. Coalition weapons bounced harmlessly off architect shields. Human weapons destroyed everything they hit. Julie directed the battle from the Liberty's Dawn, her voice calm as she gave orders. She had practiced this so many times in simulations that the real thing felt almost familiar. The Vex-Ari fought bravely but uselessly. Their ships exploded by the dozens, by the hundreds. They tried ramming tactics when their weapons proved ineffective, but human shields stopped them cold. They tried retreating, but human engines were faster. By the time the battle ended, the Vex-Ari fleet was completely destroyed, over 500 ships gone. And humanity had lost only 2 frigates to lucky hits that penetrated weakened shields. But Julie did not attack the planet itself. Instead, she broadcast a message to the enslaved population below. Humanity had not come as conquerors. They had come as liberators. The coalition had judged humans too violent for the galaxy, but the real violence was what the coalition had done to helpless species. Humanity offered freedom to any species willing to take it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Rebellions broke out across Vex Prime. The enslaved population rose up against their Vex-Ari masters. Within days, the insectoids were overthrown. The liberated species sent representatives to meet with Julie, thanking humanity for breaking their chains. They had been slaves for over 200 years, and now they were free. Stephanie Morgan accompanied the fleet as the chief engineer responsible for maintaining the architect technology. She established contact with the liberated species, offering to share human technology with them. Not weapons, but the tools to rebuild their world, to heal their planet, to create a better future. The gesture was calculated, but also genuine. Humanity remembered what it felt like to be helpless and imprisoned. Word of Vex Prime's liberation spread through Coalition space faster than any ship could travel. Other enslaved species learned that humanity was winning, that the Coalition could be beaten. Rebellions began on a dozen worlds. The Vex Ari and Lumens tried to suppress these uprisings, but their forces were stretched thin. They had never expected to face multiple simultaneous threats. Nathan Cole had remained in the solar system, working on further improvements to architect technology. But he received reports from the fleet, analyzing the performance of their ships in actual combat. The technology worked even better than predicted. The shields held up against sustained fire. The engines allowed tactical flexibility the Coalition could not match. The weapons were devastating in their efficiency. Ryan Tucker led his battle group to a system where the Lumens held 3 planets in subjugation. The crystalline aliens were more technologically sophisticated than the Vex Ari, but they still could not match architect-based systems. Ryan's ships destroyed the Lumen garrison fleet, then helped the local population overthrow their oppressors. He was learning that liberation was as important as military victory. The campaign continued for months. Julie Barnes led the main fleet from system to system, destroying Coalition forces, liberating enslaved populations, and building alliances. Marcus Stone coordinated strategy from the Liberty's dawn, directing multiple battle groups simultaneously. The Solar Defense Force was fighting on a dozen fronts, and they were winning on every one. But not everyone in the Coalition was an enemy. Stephanie Morgan made contact with several species that had joined voluntarily, that had believed the Coalition's promises of peace and prosperity. She explained humanity's position, showed them evidence of Coalition atrocities, offered them a choice. Some species chose to remain loyal to the Vex Ari and Lumens. Others reconsidered their allegiances. The turning point came when Julie's fleet reached the Lumen homeworld. The planet was beautiful, covered in crystal formations that glowed with internal light. The Lumens had built their civilization in harmony with their world, creating architecture that was more art than engineering. But they had also built their power on the backs of enslaved species, and that could not be forgiven. The Lumen Defense Fleet was the largest force humanity had yet encountered. Over 1,000 ships protected their homeworld, equipped with the best weapons and shields the Coalition could produce. For the first time, Julie felt uncertain. The numbers were overwhelming. Even with superior technology, could they win against such odds? Marcus Stone looked at the tactical situation and made a decision. They could not win a straight battle, so they would not fight one. Instead, he ordered the fleet to bypass the Lumen defense and strike at the infrastructure supporting it. Power stations, communication networks, supply depots. Human ships hit these targets with surgical precision, crippling the Lumen ability to coordinate their defense. The Lumen fleet, suddenly blind and unable to communicate effectively, fell into chaos. Julie's ships exploited that chaos. Ruthlessly, they picked off enemy vessels that had become separated from the main force. They destroyed ships that could not coordinate with their allies. The battle turned into a massacre, not because humans were cruel, but because they were efficient. After 6 days of fighting, the Lumens sued for peace. Julie accepted their surrender, but imposed terms. The Lumens would release all their enslaved populations. They would dismantle their military forces. They would be confined to their home system, under the same kind of barrier they had helped impose on humanity 60 years earlier. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Vex Ari fought longer than the Lumens, but with the same result. Their homeworld fell after a brutal, month-long campaign. Ryan Tucker led the final assault, his battle group fighting through the last desperate defenders. When the Vexari finally surrendered, they too were confined to their home system, prisoners in the cage they had helped build for others. With the Coalition's leadership defeated, the rest of their empire collapsed rapidly. Species that had been held together by force now went their separate ways. Some declared independence, others formed new alliances. The galaxy was suddenly free and chaotic, full of possibilities and dangers. Amanda Foster, now 80 years old, arrived in Coalition space 6 months after the campaign began. She came not as a soldier, but as a diplomat, representing the civilian government of humanity. She met with leaders from dozens of species, listening to their stories, understanding their fears and hopes. Amanda had spent 60 years keeping hope alive. Now she would help build something new from the ruins of the Coalition. Daniel Wright did not live to see the end of the campaign. He died peacefully during the siege of the Vexari homeworld, his heart simply giving out after a century of service. His last words were to Ryan Tucker, whom he saw as representing the best of the new generation. He told Ryan to remember that winning the war was not enough. Humanity had to win the peace too. The Terran Alliance was officially formed 5 years after the barrier fell. It was not an empire or a federation, but something new. A voluntary association of species committed to mutual defense and cooperation. Earth became the capital, not because humans demanded it, but because other species respected what humanity had accomplished. From prisoners to liberators in 60 years, humanity had earned their position through sacrifice and determination. Nathan Cole was chosen to lead the Alliance's science division. At 67, he was still young by the standards of modern medicine. He oversaw the sharing of architect technology with Alliance members, carefully teaching other species the principles that humanity had learned. Knowledge was meant to be shared, not hoarded. The architects had understood that, and humanity would honor their legacy. Julie Barnes retired from military service to become the Alliance's first ambassador to the former Coalition species. She worked to heal the wounds of war, to build bridges between former enemies. It was harder than fighting battles, but also more important. Peace had to be actively built, not just declared. Ryan Tucker took command of the Alliance Defense Force, the military that would protect all member species. He remembered the lessons of the war. Superior technology was important, but so was knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. The Coalition had failed because they relied only on force. The Alliance would succeed by balancing strength with wisdom. Stephanie Morgan continued developing architect technology, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. She discovered new principles in the ancient archives, new possibilities for exploration and creation. The architects were gone, but their knowledge lived on, adapted and improved by the species they had hoped would find them. The Vexari and Lumens remained confined to their home systems, watched over by Alliance monitors. Some called for their extermination, arguing they would always be a threat, but humanity remembered their own imprisonment and refused to become like their former captors. The insectoids and crystallines would have their chance at redemption, however long it took. 60 years ago, the Coalition had cast out humanity, declaring them too violent for the galaxy. They had imprisoned humans in their own solar system, expecting them to either die out or accept permanent defeat. Instead, humanity had survived, adapted, and thrived. They had found ancient technology, mastered it, and used it to break their chains. They had defeated their captors and liberated dozens of species in the process. Now humanity stood at the center of a new galactic order, not as conquerors or tyrants, but as the species that had turned their greatest defeat into ultimate victory. They had proven that being cast out did not mean being broken, that imprisonment could not destroy determination, that those who survive what should destroy them become stronger than those who tried to break them. The galaxy would never forget the lesson humanity taught, that the species you dismiss and imprison today might become the masters of tomorrow, that cruelty and arrogance always carry a price, that sometimes The greatest mistake is underestimating those who have nothing left to lose. Humanity had been cast out. They had survived. And now they stood as masters of the galaxy, not through conquest, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat. The stars that had been denied to them for 60 years now belonged to humanity and all their allies. The cage was broken. The prisoners were free. And the galaxy would never be the same.